I finally found the error which made the dial light, well, the light for the tuning dial, run or rather burn so faintly. And it was the stupidest reason of all. There was simply a bad contact. I had soldered a resistor back, but badly, and the light bulb was simply not getting enough power to burn. So yeah, I solved that problem, and I also managed to repair the dial needle movement. So well, I think I'm just going to show you how it works, since a picture is worth more than 1,000 words. So here we go. Oh yes, indeed, it burns brightly now. So let's wait for a little bit of sound. Oh yeah, I also repaired the tone switch. This is high tone, this is low tone, and as you can hear, it works perfectly.
Deswegen schon kurz vor dem Aus. Der jetzt geschlossene Vergleich sieht vor, dass rund 9,7 Milliarden Dollar in bar an die Justizbehörde fließt. Der andere Teil des Geldes soll Hausbesitzern in Not zugutekommen. Die Strafe dürfte das wirtschaftliche Ergebnis der Bank im laufenden Quartal verhageln. Das Institut räumt selbst ein, dass sich der Vorsteuergewinn voraussichtlich um 5,3 Milliarden Dollar verringern dürfte.
Jasper Barenberg berichtet und wir kommen zu den Börsennachrichten. An der Wall Street in New York schloss der Dow Jones Index bei 17.039 Punkten, ein Plus von 0,4%. Der Nasdaq legte 0,1% zu auf 4.532 Punkte. Und über Aktuelles vom Börsentag in Frankfurt berichtet Mischa Erhardt.
Schlechte
Today it is home to the Hungarian family, which has lived here since the 19th century.
Tout et son contraire, on retrouve chaque soir les entretiens de Philippe Vandel avec des personnalités. Ce soir, la comédienne Valérie Mérès.
Valérie Mérès, avec nous, comédienne de théâtre et de cinéma. Vous parlez beaucoup d'amour et d'histoire d'amour dans les interviews que vous donnez. Et alors vous dites, l'amour est beau comme dans les films. Il y a donc toujours à la fin le mot fin. Vous croyez
ça, moi?
Ouais.
Je crois que j'ai tellement mis l'amour sur un piédestal quand j'étais très jeune. J'ai voulu être amoureuse très très jeune. Pour moi, à 5 ans, j'étais déjà amoureuse du petit voisin. À 7 ans, du...
Yeah. You know what else is a long time? A whole year. And that's how long you can enjoy half-price broadband from TalkTalk.
Dad, do you ever you're being a voiceover.
I can't help myself, love. The TalkTalk half-price broadband sale. Totally unlimited broadband for just £1.75 a month with £15.95 line rental. Enjoy a fairy tale year of half-price broadband. Vous mettez le mot fort.
Ouais, j'ai beaucoup fait ça dans ma vie. C'est vrai que j'ai beaucoup fait ça.
Et vous avez même dit dans la vie, je veux être celle qui part, pas celle qui reste. Vous avez beaucoup quitté de...
Sommer führte dann zum Ausgleich. Kurz vor der Pause patzte auch Sarajevos Keeper. Branimir Irgota traf per Kopf zum 2:1, der Halbzeitstand. Im zweiten Durchgang kam der FK Sarajevo nach einem von vielen Gladbacher Ballverlusten erneut zum Ausgleich. Doch Gladbach setzte nach und Branimir Irgota sorgte mit seinem zweiten Tor für den Sieg. Ausgerechnet.
Well, as you can see for yourselves, the tuning mechanism now works, although it's extremely touchy, so you barely need to touch it and it changes frequency already. So, well, I wouldn't say this is really a very well engineered radio, but it functions, and it probably must have cost not too much in comparison to other models in the day. Oh yeah, it's a little bit low, the needle, because normally it's resting on a needle guide, but also you can tell that the number of stations that can be received in the AM band, at least where I live, are all positioned at one end of the frequency band and almost none at the other, which makes it a little bit annoying in a sense to test the radio. But, well, the point is, the radio remember works. This is the cabinet of the Philips. Now, I need to mount the chassis back into the cabinet. And if we take a look on the inside, you'll see what I mean. Well, on the sides you see those rails. You see one there and you see one there. Let me give it a little bit more light. So there. And the chassis slides into that rail on both sides, like there. Now, originally the chassis would slide into this space and be attached firmly to it by putting in a screw into the chassis and screwing it into this stand here inside the cabinet. Now on the other side, normally you would want to find exactly the same one. However, that one had broken off. Probably somebody tried to unmount the chassis and broke the stand off right here. Yeah. Now, as you can see, I managed to make or remake the stand with a polymer, and more specifically with epoxy glue, but I added a pigment so to darken it, so that it wouldn't be so, how should I say, so different from its surroundings. Okay, granted, you can still see it's a repair, but I reasoned that since it's completely down and inside the cabinet, that the color itself really wouldn't matter. It's far more important that the stand is solid, solid enough, in fact, so that I could screw the chassis back into it. Now, the screw, the type of screw you would need would be this kind of screw. It's a 2mm screw, 2 millimeters diameter screw. I guess you would call that a 1/16 inch screw, and well, that's the right kind of screw for this opening. You know, it screws in perfectly, as you can see. Now, the reason why I'm using a nut onto the screw is because the screw is a few millimeters too long, and I really don't want to destroy the Bakelite when I screw the chassis fast with the screw. So by screwing the screw too deeply, I would break the Bakelite in this stand, as it was broken here. Now, to be able to screw into that repaired stand, I need to drill a hole. In fact, I need to drill a hole of a little bit bigger than 2 mil. And then I need to make a thread in it so that I can screw this type of screw into it and thus attach the chassis, which shouldn't pose too much of a problem, I think. So that's what I'm going to do in this cabinet. Also, there's a small, nice little detail up there. I'm sure you notice this screw here and this piece of aluminum. It is my guess that the aluminum functions as a sort of a mass for the antenna, and it is connected to the chassis via a wire and a special contact, namely this, as you can see. And you see here there's a hole drilled into it, which conveniently fits the screw you see there. Yeah? And then when you screw that little piece of metal fast to the cabinet, it presses in on this aluminum paper, thus forming an electrical contact. So that will also be something to mount back. And then, of course, ultimately, when I repaired that stand you see here by drilling a hole into it and then threading it, then I will have to remount the chassis and see whether it will fit snugly and correctly into the cabinet, which I think it will. I don't foresee any. If you're going to fit in the chassis into the cabinet, there are a few details you need to take into account. First of all, as you can see here, let me put the chassis a little bit more up so that you can view what I'm trying to explain. So as you can see here, the chassis is sitting on rails on both sides. Yeah, so you need to slide in the chassis into the cabinet like that. Also, before you do, you need to unmount the needle pointer. The needle pointer goes in only at the very last. Yeah, so you need to unmount the needle pointer. Or just as a side remark, I repainted the needle pointer red because that was its original color. However, I didn't use paint, I used nail polish, which sincerely gives me the best type of color. It's not a blood red, it's more like a slightly purplish red, but only ever so slightly, and it has the right color tone. So I use this nail polish. You'll forgive me if I can't supply you with much more information than this. Only the color code is 2B. So if you know what to do with this color code, well, this is the type of stuff you need to buy for that sort of thing. And anyway, it's just the right quantity. You don't need a lot of it. And nail polish dries quickly. Okay, so that was a side remark. Also, you have to take into account that you need to reconnect the speaker wires. Now I stuck them temporarily with a little bit of tape to the inside of the cabinet, but you need to disconnect the speaker wires and ultimately reconnect them, obviously. Also, there is that piece of silver, aluminized paper at the top of the radio, and ultimately you need to reconnect this green wire to it. Now, one of the things I noticed is that this wire is way too short, so I will prolong the wire with another piece of say 8 inches, so about 20 centimeters. So just to make it more handy to slide the chassis out and back in if needed. Also, you'll notice that the new power resistors I mounted are really a snug fit. They fit just around the speaker as they should. So that's really perfect. So that is also a good thing. Anyway, so that's a thing you need to take into account when remounting the chassis. You'll notice underneath, let me show you. Underneath, you have the small dial light, and it has to fit into that hole over there. Now, let me zoom in if I can. Now, on top of the dial light stand, you'll see that small screw just behind the red wires. Now, you can adjust the height of the dial light by releasing the screw and sliding up or down that little piece of phenolic plastic. So that's the way you adjust the height of the dial light. Okay, so ultimately I need to screw back the chassis to its stand, and you see it there. I'm zooming in on it. So that's what you'll need to do. You'll need to reattach the stand, well, the chassis really, to the stand over there. So, but I noticed now that my fuse is a bit too low, so I might need to readjust the height of the fuse holder to be able to reach the screw head. Anyway, those are all the details you need to take into account when remounting the chassis. But as you can see, it's a snug fit. Now, what about the front? Well, let me show you. Well, as you can see, unfortunately, Philips did not engineer it quite precisely. You see, the shafts are not exactly in the center of the openings, and unfortunately, I would say that's typical for this kind of radio. You know, it's cheap. It was built cheaply in the time, and well, it isn't cheap anymore because it's a collectible. But back in the days, those radios were built to be relatively cheap, so that even people with a small budget could buy one. So obviously, as you can tell, the engineering wasn't extremely accurate. The shafts are rather inside, pointing to the inside of the openings instead of centered. Well, you can't adjust the shaft's position either, so you're stuck with it. So the best thing you can do is remount the chassis so that the shafts are as centered as possible. Once you've done that and you have positioned the needle, and anyway, you have to slide in the needle like this. So you see, this is the pointer arm, the long piece here, and then you have the carrying arm, which is the shorter one. Yeah? So what you need to do ultimately is reinsert the needle arm like this. You have to slide it in through this opening, which is not too easy, but it can be done. You see, you slide it in like this. You slide it in like this, and then you turn the radio over completely. You turn it upside down, and then from below, from this side here, you can reattach the needle. You can reattach the needle to the carrying wire, but as you can see, it's a fiddly job. So you better do it if you're in a good mood and you have a lot of patience, because it can take you up to 20 minutes. I'm sure you'll remember that when I started repairing this chassis, that the wiring of the dial movement mechanism was a whole jumble. Well, with the help of the service manual and a lot of elbow grease, I managed to repair it. And more specifically, I think you remember that this part here, which is a wire guide, a flexible wire guide, was, well, I only have one of them, and theoretically I should have had two. Now, in the end, it didn't prove too much of a problem to solve, and as you can see, I used a small plastic tube, and in my opinion, this tube is a kind of semi-hard polymer, maybe as a kind of silicone, because it's really slippery, yeah, which is ideal actually for the mechanism. You want as little friction as possible. Now, okay, you will ask me, okay, but where did you find the tubing? Well, I'll tell you, I found it in a very cheap Japanese fountain pen. Yes, that's right. This tube is the tube which normally holds the ink of a fountain pen. Well, it's actually, I don't think you call it a fountain pen, but just a normal pen. And I just removed the tip of the tube, and I washed it through with a little bit of acetone to get as much of the ink out of the tube. There was still a tiny little bit of blue ink left in it, and I washed it out with acetone as best as I could. and it worked out fine. I just needed to cut a little bit of the tube to make it fit. And okay, it doesn't have exactly the same shape as the metal wire guide, but really that isn't a problem. You just need to bend it without cracking it. So you put it into the openings you see here on the side, this opening here and that opening there, and then you slowly bend it until it has the exact right shape to fit into the holes. And then it was just a matter of pulling through a 15-pound tensile strength piece of nylon cord. And okay, you'll say, oh, wait a minute, where did you find the nylon cord? Well, guys, it's time to pick up your fishing poles again and have a closer look. Indeed, your fishing poles use a special kind of nylon cord which has a calculated tensile strength. You can get all sorts of nylon wire, going from just a couple of pounds tensile strength up to, oh, I don't know, maybe 100 pounds. So I used the standard 15 pounds tensile strength and thickness of nylon cord, which is just the right type of nylon cord, not too thin, not too thick, so that it has enough bending force too, and just the right amount of tensile strength, because you have to put some force on the wire to make it go all straight. You see here, it's really straight, and there's quite a bit of tensile strength on it, because you can see it vibrate. Well, I hope you can see it, because it's a really thin wire. Anyway, so that's the trick. I used nylon wire of the correct tensile strength and thickness, and I used a small tube out of an old fountain pen. And there you go. I managed to repair it, and it works like a charm. Well, as you can see, if I dial, if I move the dial rod or the dial axis, well, it also moves the wheel of the tuning capacitor. Yeah, so, and as you can see, it moves quite well. Yeah, there's really no need to put a lot of force. It just moves easily. Okay, I reached the other end. Now let's move it back to its original position. And as you can see, the small tube has a little bit of give to it. Yeah, so which is fine, because it takes away tension on the whole thing, without ruining it. Yeah, because if you put too much tension, the wire might break, of course. But since this tube here has a little bit of give, as I move the wiring, you see it gives a little bit, like a spring, which is ideal. And actually, you can see the metal wire guide also moving. This piece here also moves a little bit when you roll the wire. You can see the movement. Yeah, so this tube is a lot stiffer than this, but its end is long enough so that it can function as a sort of a spring lever. So in fact, what the metal wire guide does by shrinking and extending, this tube does by leveraging the wire either up or down and always keeping the tension right. So I'm gearing up to drill a hole through the new stud which I constructed out of epoxy. And well, as you recall, I need to make about a 2.5 millimeter wide hole and about 1 centimeter deep, which I will consequently use to turn in a stainless steel screw which will ultimately hold the chassis into place. So I'm going to use my mini drill, which you see here, to to thread the hole and insert the new screw, just to test it out. And as you can see, it works. Okay, the feel is slightly different from the other hole, that one over there. But all in all, given the fact that it's epoxy, it works rather well. Into the cabinet of the Philips, you need to take into account this. If you take a look at the chassis, you see this part here. Now, this is a piece of rubber. You can take it off, and then you see the chassis, the naked chassis itself here. So on the other side there's exactly the same kind of piece, like this. Yeah. So it's nothing special. It's, in fact, I even suspect it's just a piece of black rubber tube they cut. Anyway, you slide it over this edge here, like this. And then the goal is to slide in the chassis in that direction and make it slide into the rail, which you see over there. Yeah. So this rail here, you need to slide in that black piece of rubber, which I showed to you right now, into this space. So that's what I'm trying to do now. Now, I need both my hands to do that. So I set up the camera on a tripod so that, well, I have both my hands to do the job. So here we go. Yeah, you have to be careful to center the two shafts of the potentiometer and the let me see. Okay, the shafts are centered. So now what? Okay, I think the radio is now in its place, and now I have to take a look underneath. Okay, let me switch over to hand mode. So over there you see the new stud I built, on which the chassis must rest. So give me a moment. I need to align the chassis so that it drops precisely onto that stud. Okie dokie. I think that is it. Now, let me show you. Okay, so, as you can see, it's rusting now fully on the stud here. So this is the new stud I built. It's also resting on the old-fashioned stud, which you see over there. That. So that's okay. Now, as you can see, the shafts need to go through the holes down there and down there. And already you can see the shafts are not properly centered. But you can also see there's absolutely no way of aligning the centers with the chassis, with the cabinet I mean. So fat chance to do that. Anyway, let's show you the result from the front. Okay. Well, this is the result from the front, and as you can see, the shaft is not entirely straight, not entirely aligned as it should be, neither is it on the other side. But honestly, that's the way it was manufactured, and well, like I just said, the goal is to align it as well as I can, but I can't do miracles. I can't perform miracles, so this is the best I think I will ever be able to align. Okay, the chassis is back into the cabinet, and okay, I'll admit I had to take it out and put it back a couple of times, because in my eagerness to make the radio work, I forgot to insert the knobs. Actually, you know, the knobs are so big that, well, the base of the knobs, that you need to slide them in first. You know, this knob, which is the frequency band knob, and then that piece over here, which is this one here, which is the tone selector, you know, bass tones, high tones, you know what I mean. So these two knobs have to be inserted first before you can slide in the chassis. Now comes a rather difficult part of the job, which is to insert the little needle which will serve for indicating the frequency. Now, as you can see, this is the front of the cabinet, right? This is the front, and the needle, the long part, needs to move within this space, yeah. But obviously it's actuated by the little guide wires which you see here. I mean, they are really thin, but I think you can just see them, these two wires here. So I need to insert this little thing into the chassis, wriggling it in, and then attach this part here, this end, to the lower wire, which for the moment is the upper wire. Okay, now the joke is, or the funny thing is, I made a mark about where, excuse me, I was wrong. I need to attach it to the upper wire, not the lower wire. Anyway, I made a mark, and I think maybe you can just see it right here where where I have the tweezers. Right here, there is the mark. So I marked it when the chassis was out of the cabinet to indicate where the base of the needle should go, so that it would indicate the frequency rather accurately. Well, as accurate as is possible with this crude mechanism. But okay, so what I need to do is to insert this thing like this. I need to make it point towards me. Then I need to insert it into the slit. And there you have it. There it is. Okay? So now what I need to do is to wrap the guide wire around that little thingy over there. Yeah? But I need my two hands to do that. And there you go. I wrapped, I don't know if I can, okay, it's focusing. So let me push aside this wire. So as you can see, I wrapped the wire, the guide wire, around the base of the needle. And I wrapped it around, oh, I'd say 2 times, 3 times, you know, just to make it solidly anchored. And there you go. Now this end here, this side, this one, when the radio is right side up, this end here leans against this wire, yeah, so that the needle stays stable and pointing upwards. So that's why you need to attach it to this wire and not the other one, yeah. So you need to attach it to the lower wire, which becomes the upper wire once the radio is upside down. Okay? So let me show you the result now at the front of the radio. Okay, hang on, because I'm using one hand here. I have to be a little bit careful upending the radio. Okay, hang on, we're almost there. One moment. Whoa, take it easy, come on. Yeah. Okie dokie. So there you go. Now the radio is right side up. Now let's have a look at the needle, huh? Okay, it's a bit dark here, so let me... Okay, well, it's falling down. So this is not entirely what I hoped for. Okay, so back to the drawing board. There's still something. Found it. Well, the needle was leaning out. Whoa, hang on. The needle was leaning out because, you see, the metal of the needle was a little bit misshaped. So I had to reshape the needle a little bit, mind you. I didn't have to force it or anything. I just needed to reshape it a little bit. And now it functions. And there you go. The needle is placed, and I already placed the front panel, so you will get a good idea of how the radio looks when it's finished. One more thing. When you insert this piece, the front panel, you have to slide it into that edge down there. Be gentle when you do, because, well, there's quite a bit of tension down there, and you really need to slide it in, but with with force, but you have to do it really very, very carefully. So you have to push on it, but not too much. Just enough pressure to let it slide in. And at a certain stage it will simply click into place. Also, be very, very gentle with these screws. Don't tighten them too hard or you'll crack the plastic, okay? So just put gentle pressure on those screws. Well, I didn't want to leave you all without a final look on the Philips BX230U as it is in its repaired condition. Well, there you are. This is it. Isn't it a nice little radio?